What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekoWhat video. In this one, I'm going to be attempting to build the best gaming PC you can assemble in 2024, a system perfect for 4K gaming in all of the latest titles. I'll be using top-end components like an RTX 4090 to achieve the best performance possible and building the whole system inside of Lian Li's brand new O11D Evo RGB. Quite possibly the most hotly anticipated case of this year. Join me for the ride as I show you what parts make this build possible and why I picked them, how to assemble the system from start through to the finish line, and then of course we'll be looking at performance a little bit later. Let's do this. The Corsair HS80 Max is a wireless gaming headset that packs a punch. With precisely tuned 50mm neodymium drivers, Dolby Atmos support, and wireless connectivity over Bluetooth and 2.4 GHz, it has you covered. Use it with a PC, Mac, PS4 or PS5 and enjoy up to 65 hours of battery life wirelessly and 130 hours on Bluetooth in the process. Need a top up? 15 minutes of charge bags you up to 6 hours of use. Check it out at the first links in the description below. Let's start with the components, shall we, and start in no better place than the CPU. And this is actually a component where you're going to have two options for this build. It's not normally something I do, but it occasionally makes sense. If you're looking to build this system for gaming and gaming only, the Ryzen 7 7800X3D is the best bet. 8 cores, 16 threads, stupidly high clock speeds, and a tremendous amount of L3 cache make it the best gaming CPU you can buy right now. If you're instead looking to do something that's a little bit higher end for video editing, rendering, you want all those extra cores, jump up to something like an AMD Ryzen 9 7900 or 7950 X3D. They're going to pump significantly more cost into this build, and while I wanted to build the best of the best, there's no point wasting it on a CPU that people who are just gaming aren't going to utilize. To go with the CPU, I've picked up a 64GB kit of Corsair's Dominator Titanium. This is their first special edition, and is actually one of the most special RAM kits on the market. And that's because not only does it look absolutely incredible, but it actually has changeable top plates. So you can get it like this with RGB built in up top, all configurable through Corsair iCUE, or of course you can add these non-RGB, more refined and classy metal finishes instead. Performance is also really good, obviously, loads of speeds and capacities available. I went for 64 gigs because 32 is sort of the new mainstream, the new necessary amount for basically any build over $1,000. And with DDR5 RAM prices having come down so much, it's not nearly as expensive to buy a kit like this as it was 12 or 18 months ago. I've gone for a similarly high-end theme when it comes to the storage in this build, with the Crucial T700 Pro providing all of our fast flash horsepower. This is a Gen 5 drive, which means you're going to get state-of-the-art performance. We're talking 12, 13 gigabytes per second. For comparison's sake, the fastest Gen 4 drives top out at about 7 or 8 gigabytes a second. This is going to give you nearly double the performance, and we'll see Gen 5 drives get cheaper, larger capacities, and faster as the days and months go on. 2024 is going to be the year, I think, of Gen 5 NVMe drives, and it's really amazing how fast storage has progressed. The only thing that seems a little bit backwards about it is the size of this heatsink. It's massive, and that's because Gen 5 drives run incredibly hot. So be really careful when you're picking out a drive. The more cooling it has, the better performance you're going to likely see on paper. The whole build is going to be built onto this, the Asus ROG Strix X670E-E gaming Wi-Fi. It's one of the higher end X670 motherboards available, but isn't the most ludicrously expensive. Something like the Aorus Master from Gigabyte or the MSI Ace and Godlight range allow you to take things a step further with even better connectivity. The reason I've picked this board though is it just does everything we need. We're still going to get some room for overclocking. We still get all the ports and connectors you could possibly need. With all your usual audio and optical audio outputs, Wi-Fi 6E, your 10 gigabit USB Type A's, and even a 20 gigabit USB Type C. The rest of the board is absolutely stacked with really great power delivery, fantastic cooling, and cool unique features, like a button just here that allows for an easy release of the PCI slot. Really, really cool features that make this board quite an easy one to actually build with. The graphical horsepower will be provided by none other than the RTX 4090, and despite the RTX 40 series supercards on the horizon, the 4090 is going to remain its place as the top dog of the GPU market, the most powerful gaming graphics card in the world. Now, it's got loads of VRAM, incredible straight rasterization performance, support for NVIDIA's DLSS 3.5, state-of-the-art ray tracing. It is just an absolute beast, and of course it is expensive. This is obviously where a lot of the budget in this build has gone, but you do certainly get value for money if your aim is to get the best of the best, especially at 4K. This Asus TUF card is one of my favorite RTX 4090 designs. Not only is it large and imposing, but it does a great job of keeping it cool. It's not quite as outlandish as, say, the Strix model that you could find, and it's a little bit more on the classy side than alternatives like the Palette GameRock series, which, while I do like, I don't think are quite the right fit for today's build. We want something that looks out there, but we also want a system that looks sleek, classy, and expensive, because after all, this PC is definitely not cheap. I also think the graphics card is going to look great. Oh gosh, whoa! Inside of this, that is actually way heavier than I thought it was going to be. The Lian Li O11D Evo RGB. Oh my goodness me. If you want a dual chamber case, the OGs are really Lian Li. When you look at things like the Hytewise 60, the new Montech King 95, they all take inspiration from the O11 chassis. And obviously, if you want the best, often the original is the place that you look. You get room for up to a 420mm radiator at the top of the case, with 360mm support at the sides and the bottom. Very conclusive. You also get an ARGB strip at the top and bottom of the case that wraps all the way around and looks absolutely phenomenal. I first saw this case back at Computex in 2023, such a long time ago now, and 2 adjustable places for the motherboard to be installed. So you can change the height of the motherboard and the rear I/O according to the kind of radiators you'll be putting in the system. So loads and loads of cooling options. Build quality as well just feels phenomenal. You've got these really nice panels with these sort of integrated mesh that kind of also acts as a dust filter. This sort of one-piece design is becoming increasingly common. The tempered glass, of course, wraps right around the front of the case and is nice and easily removed. Feels really quite substantial and isn't too heavily tinted, which I like. And of course, at the rear of the case, if I just take off this back panel, once again, really easy to remove and built well. You'll find room for your 3.5-inch and 2.5-inch drives on this nice little movable bracket. Behind that, room for the power supply, all of your integrated cable management, and even things on the side like your RGB controller, power button, and front I/O. Certainly not the first time this has been done, but the PSU actually protrudes slightly from the outside of the case at the back, giving you a little bit more length on the power supply as well, which is great to see. Anyway, that's enough talking about the case. We'll come back and build the system in it in a moment. Before then, just 1 or 2 components to polish us off. RM1000E from Corsair, a fantastic cybernetics platinum certified, basically equivalent to 80 plus platinum power supply. Finally, to make sure the whole build lines up with that iconic Lian Li design, obviously gone ahead and got the Galahad 2 Trinity, their 360mm all-in-one cooler. If you're opting for an Intel-based build with like the i9 14900K, pop this up to a 420. Fan-wise, I've not just got these 3 boxes, I've got, wait there. Many boxes of fans, and there's a wide variety. They're not actually all the same. So we've got 120mm RGB fan. Okay, what's so special about that? A 140mm RGB fan. Cool. A 140mm with a reverse blade. Another one, a normal one, a normal one, another reverse blade. And these 2 here are the LCD models. So they've actually got screens in the center hub of the fan. Yes. Why? Not particularly sure. Cool? Yes. So I think we've covered all the parts pretty well. Let me begin by actually installing CPU, RAM, SSD, and the motherboard, first of all, outside of the case while everything is nice and easy to access. The first port of call is popping the CPU into the motherboard. Obviously got to be a little bit more careful nowadays that AMD have moved the pins onto the boards rather than the CPUs. RAM DIMMs are going to pop into the 2nd and 4th slots in this build, so you've room potentially for up to 128 gigs of RAM if you go ahead and pick up another identical kit to this one. The Gen 5 NVMe is going to go into the top slot on the motherboard. With this being Gen 5, do be careful because obviously if you pop it into a Gen 4 slot, you're going to get the much slower Gen 4 speeds. Typically the top slot is the one that's Gen 5 on pretty much all modern AMD and Intel motherboards. There is one more thing that I'm going to do at this stage before getting the case involved. That's do some of the CPU cooler bracket prep. And that means that unfortunately, and I don't often do this, I am going to have to consult the manual of our Galahad Trinity 2 360 60. So let's see if we can open this up. Manual though looks pretty easy to follow. We want the AMD instructions, which are actually resoundingly simple. And basically what the cooler does is just slots onto the pre-installed plastic brackets on the motherboard. It looks to me like on our motherboard that these have been taken off previously. So excuse me for a few minutes while I find out where they've gone, fasten them back on, and that's all the prep we actually need to do because we're using an AMD config. This case is a lot lighter with all the panels taken off, which is definitely a good thing. The Evo also has these raised center standoffs like pretty much all cases nowadays, so it should just be a case, he says, of getting it lined up. Can be a little bit fiddly. There we go. And that will just hold it into place while we screw it in. Just 9 screws to do here, and that will secure the motherboard properly into place. The next thing is the radiator. So this is where I've got to be a little bit clever with the fans that I actually have. This top radiator bracket comes out to make the radiator installation nice and easy, and when you combine that with the pre-installed fans, the whole thing's a bit of a doddle really. I'm going to pop it this way so the tubes are on the far right hand side of the case, and just get the whole thing screwed into the bracket on the outermost position. The reason I'm going to do it that way is so that we can see as much of the fans on the side profile as possible. In hindsight, I wouldn't have picked up so many 140mm fans. I'll instead pick up a few 120s, and I'll link these down in the description below. I can still go ahead though and add these other 140s in afterwards. It's then nice and easily a case of just dropping the radiator in. Get all the cables in there as well for good measure. Just try and align this on the side. Yeah, good stuff. Look at that. So the radiator's in. Obviously the water block I need to do in a moment. Before then, just going to secure the radiator mount, make sure that doesn't go anywhere, and also of course add some thermal paste on the CPU. Large grain of rice size, you guys know the drill. That's going to provide the nice thermal bond between the processor and the cooler. Love the head though, by the way, on this Lian Li Galahad. It's adjustable, customizable, you can swap it out. I like this Lian Li one. I think it looks really, really good. As far as the fans are concerned, now is as good a time as any to actually get these installed too. So I'm going to pop the 140s with the reversible blades on the bottom, and then the fans with the displays or the screens on the side of the case here. I'll have to remove these 2 black covers. They're just there if you don't put any fans in to make sure it still looks okay. And I'll also add the 120mm in at the back. These ones are easily clippable together. So many fans now, you can sort of daisy chain one to the next or connect them digitally. That's going to make things so much easier. And again, all the different removable fan mounts make this step of the build just that little bit more stress-free than it might otherwise be. The fan's kind of going okay, but we are hitting the motherboard a little bit more than I'd like. So I'm going to take the motherboard out while trying to leave the CPU block attached just to move the whole thing up slightly, and I'm hoping that will improve the clearance. I must admit, I didn't really want to have to take the motherboard out, but I do want to do this properly, and I want to make sure the build looks absolutely spot on. Now for the second attempt at actually adding the fans into place. So this time, feed the cable through. Getting this in's a little bit tricky, but not too arduous. And alas, that seems to have done the trick. I can now actually screw these in, get them secure, stop them from going anywhere, and it looks like it was the motherboard after all causing that sort of slight incompatibility issue, shall we say. So maybe in future, a little bit more clearance at the bottom would be nice, especially for those looking to use a push-pull rad at the top. Couple more fans to go in then, 2 at the side, 1 at the back, and we should be good to go. With all the fans in, the next port of call is the graphics card. Now, you can install this graphics card in a number of different ways. The first would be a standard horizontal implementation, and while I think that looks good, and airflow-wise would be superb, because you get all this airflow from our bottom fans, let's be honest, who's building a PC inside of a fish tank-like display case and not using where's it gone? Here it is, vertical GPU mount. So we are going to adapt. This doesn't come with the case, it's an aftermarket unit. This one's from NZXT, but Cooler Master do one. I'm sure Lee and Lee probably do one. I'll link all the options for this down below. Simply remove all of the PCI lanes and swap this in instead. It does of course mean you can't then use the other lanes below it, so it's only going to work for a single expansion card config, but that's all we need in this build. Graphics card's going to slide down. Oh, it's tight. It is very tight. It is in, so just a couple of thumb screws to secure that down. Looking really good. Very happy with how this is turning out. All that remains then is the power supply. Now this is the RM1000E from Corsair. There's obviously a fair few cables that you need for this build. In fact, the built-in controller for the Lian Li fans actually requires a 6-pin VGA power cable, which is kind of crazy in terms of actually how much power consumption that takes. And of course, we do have the advantage of our super sleek, super small PCI Gen 5 cable as well for the graphics card, having to keep our GPU cable management to a bit of a minimum. Some CPU power cables as well to round things off nicely. As I say, quite a lot of power cables required, at least for this build, just to ensure that everything has nice, sufficient amounts of power. One thing that they've done a really good job of on the Vision is actually minimizing the number of screws you have to take out in order to get access at things. And I have to say, as someone who's not built in a great number of Lian Li 011 cases before, only sort of 1 or 2, it's really, really impressive. Very easy to build in. Just gonna pop some PSU cable extensions in as well for good measure, and then a pair of CPU power connections as well to the top left. And with the GPU cable here, there's no PSU extension as it's the new fancy 12-pin standard. Not only did it look pretty good, but the extensions for these have been a bit mixed in their reviews, and it's so small you're hardly going to be able to see it. So just pop that in, tuck it nicely down out the way, and we're pretty much good to go. All that's left to do now is put all the panels back on, boot this thing up, and check out the performance. But first, how good the stunning Lian Li 011D Evo RGB looks when it's all powered up. I'll rejoin you in just a few moments for the gaming benchmark. Moving through into performance, and the RTX 4090 in this build performs exactly as you'd expect. It's basically insane in every single game. Take Warzone as an example first. At 4K high with DLSS enabled and set to the quality preset, and the build achieves 175 FPS on average. The reason we've tested at 4K pretty much exclusively on this build is that we think anyone spending 4 or 5 grand on a PC should be gaming at that top end resolution. It's the same in Call of Duty's Modern Warfare 3, a very similar game. You'd expect the performance to be pretty similar, and at 4K high settings once again with DLSS enabled and set to the quality preset, the build pulled in 163 FPS on average. Move through into a harder to run game, Starfield to be specific, at 4K high settings, and the build achieved just shy of 85 FPS with 84 on average. 90 and 99 percentile results were strong too, showing consistent frame rates throughout, and while Starfield is difficult to run and poorly optimized, this build just about manages at 4K. Hogwarts Legacy at 4K high was actually a pretty similar story. Frame rates perhaps not as high as we might have expected, but still topping the charts compared to any other GPU option. Here at 4K high, the build pulled in 100 FPS on average bang on, with 90 and 75 for the 90 and 99 percentiles. Drop down to 1080p in our next title, Fortnite, at competitive settings, and the build was just, ludicrous to be frank. 322 FPS on average, with very consistent 90 and 99 percentiles that didn't drop below 280 frames per second, while moving back up to 4K in Apex Legends delivered great results too. 4K high and the build achieved 214 FPS on average, 90, 99 percentiles looking good, and I think Apex looks amazing at that top end 4K resolution. Just to round things off, one of my personal favourite games, Formula 1 2023, 4K and the ultra high preset, and the build pulled in over 200 FPS. It really is extraordinary, the performance that can be achieved, and while it is, yes, going to cost you a lot of money, at least you're getting some great numbers in return. What do you guys think of this build? Let me know in the comments down below. All the bits mentioned will be linked in the description too on Amazon and Newegg. If you enjoyed this, get subscribed, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.